Every single year in elementary, the teacher would ask us to introduce ourselves to the class on our first day of school, and they would give us a list of prompts, a list of questions to answer. The questions are usually quite similar, like what's your favorite movie, favorite food, or your favorite celebrity? And as I grew up, the answers to all of these questions changed. Only three will always remain the same: my name, my nationality, and my dream career. Hi, my name is Junzhe. Some of my friends like to call me Jay-Z. I was born in the beautiful tropical nation of Malaysia, and my dream career has always been to become an architect. It is my passion and my obsession, and I want to share my experience with you today in the hope that you might find something in it that helps you recognize and value your own passion. Like most kids, I absolutely loved playing with Legos and Minecraft, but my interest really began when my parents decided to buy a new home for the family. When I was around 6-7 years old, I would follow my parents around the city every weekend to visit sales offices, architecture firms, and property agencies. And it is this constant exposure to houses and buildings that formed the roots of my passion in architecture. My bedroom was soon piled with dozens of architectural plans, property brochures, and site maps. And soon enough, I became more excited about the prospect of purchasing a new home than either of my parents were. The toy store and playground within the mall no longer garnered any interest. Rather, it was those miniature property booths in the malls and offices that captivated my full attention. I would spend hours and hours circling these architectural models, examining the most minuscule detail and facilities within the site. It got to the stage where my parents would keep asking the property agents questions about properties they weren't even interested in, just to buy me more time to explore these models at my own will. Often, the agents would take us to visit the actual construction sites and showrooms, and I remember that it was just such a magical experience to me as a kid. I remember being filled with absolute wonder that we as humans possess the capability to transform an idea in the mind to a sketch on paper, to a physical wooden model, and finally, to a real, livable house, a place that a family would eventually call home. I didn't even know that designing houses could be a legitimate job. So when my dad revealed to me that it was literally a dream come true. And it is a dream that is just as strong for me today. I began to draw day and night. In my imagination, I created a city-state where all of my dream designs would turn into reality. From soaring skyscrapers to multi-level stadiums to space-age airports, no design was crazy enough that it could not be achieved in my imaginary world. In my passion for design, I moved beyond architecture into the world of infrastructure and city planning. I drafted this enormously complex subway system for the city, and over the months and years, I would add to this sprawling subway network, much as a real city transport system would grow and expand. Every time I ran out of space, my mom would help me tape more pieces of paper onto it to allow me to expand my never-ending design canvas for all of these ideas that were flying around my head. Indeed, the supportiveness of my parents played a huge role in my persistence with this passion. Every year, they would take me to visit exhibitions and architectural wonders all around the world, and it is from these visits that I would draw all my crazy inspirations from. But despite being super supportive of me, my parents were also extremely practical people. I remember showing my visionary designs to my father when I was a child. Like this pencil skyscraper, for instance. I thought it looked cool and slick, but to my disappointment, my dad merely said, "Wow, you see, son, but this building is way too thin. There's no way that could withstand the wind." "But what about this?" He replied, "Lovely drawing, son. But these hang gardens of this building, it's impossible to be built because, well, it will be too hard to sustain it in the air." "Surely this is fine?" He sighed, "But son, can you even imagine the expense it would require to build a structure like this? Plus, the big hole in the middle is just such a waste of space." You can already imagine the reaction for this design, inspired by durian, the most popular fruit in Malaysia. "That's a great imagination, son, but this is just too unreal. It could never be an actual building." I was only a kid, and I know my dad did not mean to hurt me in any way, but I remember feeling a little crushed, discouraged, disheartened, like a silly kid with silly passions and silly dreams. But then, a number of years later, I went to an exhibition of the legendary and visionary British Iraqi architect Zaha Hadid. You might know some of the buildings she designed, like the Haydar Aliyev Center in Azerbaijan and the Galaxy Soho in Beijing. I was incredibly fortunate to have the opportunity to have a small conversation with one of the company's earliest members, Director Satoshi Ohashi. He told me about the company's journey from a tiny, shabby office to one of the most influential and idolized architecture firms in the world today. He told me about his working experience with Zaha Hadid herself and her philosophy of creating radical and wildly imaginative designs the world has never seen before. But because of how crazy and expensive their designs were, the company struggled to appeal to investors, and for the first decade after their founding, they received no project offers. Zero. Satoshi told me there was a sense of urgency and panic about the architecture's future, both financially and reputation-wise. Many commentators began to mock Zaha Hadid as just a paper architect, one with ideas too crazy and avant-garde to be actually built and used by people. And so I asked, why didn't the company just tone down their designs a little, make it more practical and normal? Satoshi smiled, shook his head, and said, "Because that's not our philosophy. That's not who we are. An architect is an extremely tiring and stressful job with average pay, and we're all aware of it. You don't do it for money or to live an easy life. You do it because of passion." My head was buzzing after that conversation. All my discouragement faded away, and all my passion for architecture flooded through me like a huge burst of adrenaline. I walked away from that conversation with a new perception of architecture, feeling inspired and motivated, but at the same time, I felt a little concerned and worried about the workload and all the sacrifices I have to make if I were to really become an architect. Everywhere I looked to find out more about the practicality of pursuing architecture as my career, online sources, my friends in college studying architecture, professional architects, and all of them told me the same thing. Without an all-consuming passion for architecture, it will not work. So I had to discover for myself, was my passion enough to pursue this path in life? Well, yes, of course, I know I have a passion, but do I have enough passion? Do I have enough passion, like Ohashi said, to sacrifice my time, my energy, my sleep, just to perfect a single design? Do I have enough passion to sacrifice my free time and weekends and spend it all in the studio just for work? No one can answer all of these questions for me. And as I analyzed myself, I discovered three main aspects of passion that reassured me about my dream of becoming an architect. First, I believe that someone who is truly passionate will always want to make their ideas a reality and share them with society. They are proud of their vision and are eager to persuade others to believe in it too. Since I was a child, I have always been desperate in trying to share my architectural interests with the world. For my second grade show and tell, for example, I brought in my favorite book at the time, New Buildings of the Masters, a 300-page hardcover book on the newest architecture developments around the world, and shared this with the entire class. Now remember, this was when I was in 2nd grade, so you can imagine how puzzled and confused everyone was. Most of the class didn't even know what the word architecture meant. But regardless, I wanted to let them know about architecture. I was determined to share my passion. A few years later, I started my own imaginary architecture firm called Jay-Z Architects and hired my friends to work under me and to share my designs with. Ultimately, I think a part of being passionate is to develop the sense of confidence and a sense of pride to share your ideas with others. I always want to share my passion, and I have learned to not be discouraged if not everyone loves my work and shares my vision. The second characteristic of true passion is that you will never feel tired or bored. Never. For example, I can spend hours looking at architectural sketches, models, site maps, things that will be unbelievably boring to someone who is not interested in this world. Often, I would work on a project and draw into the night for hours and hours without even realizing how late it is. Last but not least, I discovered that a truly passionate individual never compromises about their visions and core beliefs. They refuse to comply with society standards just to live an easy life. Rather, they are always willing to challenge norms and expectations in pursuit of their own vision. You see this trait across a multitude of successful and extremely passionate individuals. From Steve Jobs' ambition to create a never-seen-before touchscreen phone, to Zaha Hadid's visionary, almost surrealist geometric architectural philosophy. I realize that an individual passion is one that will always stick to their principles in the face of any criticism. I remember after discovering my full passion for architecture following my trip to the Zaha Hadid exhibition, I showed my imaginary, crazy, and childish designs to my father again. I said, "Do you remember this, Dad? You said this design was impossible because it would be blown away by the wind? Well, take a look at this. This is Steinway Tower in New York, a building taller than the Empire State, but only as wide as the length of a basketball court. Do you remember saying that these hanging gardens were impossible to be built? Take a look at this. This is One Central Park in Sydney, with the tallest vertical hanging garden in the world. Remember this design that could never be built because of the expense? Well, take a look at this. This is a Dubai frame, which unsurprisingly holds the record for the largest frame in the world. And remember this being too unrealistic? Look at Frank Gehry's Walt Disney Concert Hall, inspired by his passion for sailing. My father smiled, gave me a hug, and said he was proud of me. Now don't get me wrong, my father had every right to be critical of my ideas. After all, he was right. These designs of mine would have been incredibly expensive to build, and it is true that these gravity-defying structures would be hugely challenging to realize. But the problem was not with him, it was with me. My passion needed to be strong enough not to be discouraged by his criticism. I needed the passion to persist and persevere and show how my vision and ideas could be made into a three-dimensional reality. Sticking with one's passion and philosophy requires adaptation, not compliance. Rather than aimlessly following society's standards and norms, ask yourself, what can I do to make my ideas into a reality? Architecture is my passion. Mentally and spiritually, I feel happy when I design buildings, and that is the key message that I want to leave with you today about passion. Regardless of how tough it is, you will always, always find joy or some sense of belonging and pride in the thing you're passionate about. It is just as Satoshi Ohashi said, don't do it for money, Do it because of passion. It may sound like a cliche, but life is really too short to be wasted on chasing wealth. Do what makes you happy, discover your passion, your purpose in life, and choose a path you won't regret. Thank you.